fallen to the states to perform the role that Mr Dutton should be performing under the Constitution. So he shouldn't be criticising when we're doing the task he should be performing.
Tonight, WA's 5-day lockdown ends as we continue to learn exclusive details about how the news unfolded last week. We'll also be speaking to one Perth resident about his experience in just a moment. It's Sunday the 7th of February. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
Australia is deeply concerned by the events in Myanmar today. A good friend of Australia.
World leaders keep a close eye on Myanmar just days after a military coup saw the country's leader removed from office and detained, but the reaction from China has certainly raised some eyebrows. Those details coming up in just a few minutes. And it took just 1 day for Craig Kelly to be back posting misinformation on his Facebook page. We'll have full analysis a little later, but should he resign? You can have your say in our Twitter poll right now.
Every global medical body in the world has rejected the use of those two drugs.
Incorrect.
Craig.
That is incorrect.
But you know what? I actually didn't want to get you on here to determine whether or not what you're saying is true or not.
But you are, I'm sorry, with greatest respect, you are making false statements that you are accusing me of.
And a very good evening to you. It's 7:45pm on the East Coast, 4:45 in the West, and that's where we'll begin tonight with Perth's 5-day lockdown officially ending overnight as Mark McGowan praises West Australians for getting tested and following the rules. But it came with a warning from the Premier that the state's fight against coronavirus is far from over. Chief Reporter Connor Forquet has more.
Another day, another debacle in hotel quarantine. The virus last week jumping from traveller to worker at a hotel in Melbourne and Perth. One new case in each state, two very different responses.
So to reinstate the Black Rock or New Year's Eve settings.
And for Perth?
So beginning at 6 p.m. tonight, the whole Perth metropolitan area will be going into full lockdown.
It was Australia's strongest response to a single case to date. No new community cases were recorded over the lockdown period, so was it an overreaction?
I've lain awake at night worrying about that. Was it an overreaction? I don't think so. I just prefer, if we possibly can, to crush the virus, get it out of our system, and then reopen across the board.
A short, sharp lockdown used before in response to COVID scares in Brisbane and South Australia aims to stamp out a COVID cluster before it takes hold. Epidemiologist and WHO advisor Professor Mary Louise McLaws believes it's a case of short-term pain, collective gain, telling 6 News this hard and fast approach should have been used from the beginning.
They have learnt that you have to respond very, very rapidly because it takes off. You know, if that analogy doesn't work, then think of a bushfire. And, you get to the size of a bushfire, and if the fire brigade haven't been called out, it's likely to become a fire front.
But experts are at odds as to whether it actually works. Some believe its only benefit is buying contact tracers time.
My own view is I'm not sure the lockdown would have given you that much benefit in the first place. I mean, you really only had one case. And if you've got good case finding and good testing, which you've got in Western Australia, I would have thought all the cases should have been identified from the main source.
Around the world, the reaction to the lockdown in Western Australia has been overwhelmingly positive. A New York Times article described the speed and severity of the response unthinkable to people in the US. Back home, after the virus escaped hotel quarantine, questions have been raised about the system that's supposed to keep COVID out.
The system has worked very effectively up to now and continues to work very effectively.
Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide and now Perth have all seen the virus escape hotel quarantine. Calls for an overhaul to the system are mounting. One of the proposals is to move travellers to facilities just like this one in regional areas. A report into the Grand Chancellor Hotel cluster in Brisbane, which sent the city into a 3-day lockdown, failed to find how the virus spread from room to room. Air conditioning and breaches in security ruled out, the report finding it's most likely the virus was transmitted from a surface.
Our quarantine hotels are not hospitals. They were never built to serve this purpose.
Connor Alforque, 6 News.
6 News has learnt more about how exactly the lockdown unfolded at Perth's airport, with dozens of people finding out the news just minutes before their flight was set to take off. And meanwhile, the Victorian government has faced questions about how much advance warning they had, with travellers not screened or asked to show their permit at Melbourne Airport. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has this exclusive story.
From COVID safe to COVID chaos. WA's lockdown came without warning, but for many West Australians it caused confusion and panic.
In terms of an elimination strategy, it might be a great sort of political slogan, but it's not a realistic approach to this virus. You'll send businesses broke.
He's the Minister for Home Affairs. They have the responsibility for quarantine under the Constitution, but he doesn't want to do that. So therefore it's fallen to the states to perform the role that Mr Dutton should be performing under the Constitution. So he shouldn't be criticising when we're doing the task he should be performing.
And at Perth's airports there were even more problems. 6 News has learned that one flight that was cleared for South Australia was then headed back to the terminal. Passengers told us exclusively that they were left waiting for over half an hour without being told, before eventually finding out through social media that Mark McGowan had announced a 6 p.m. lockdown. Travellers were then given the option to stay on the flight at risk of quarantine or exit the flight and return home. And while most of them left their luggage, it wasn't returned to them for 2 days. The Victorian government has also faced backlash after travellers told us that there were no authorities from the Department of Health and they didn't have to go through any screening or provide any permits at Melbourne Airport. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And for more on WA's lockdown, let's bring in political commentator Jim Sharp live for us in Perth tonight. Jim, good evening to you. What was your initial reaction to hearing that you'd be actually under a 5-day lockdown?
I think mixed reaction here. We've been living, some would say a fool's paradise, in the sense that we've been largely unaffected by the whole thing and watching with bemusement, the struggles that you've had over there on the eastern side of the country. So number one reaction was shock. The second reaction was probably Mark McGowan's still very popular here and is seen as being a very decisive leader. So I think that there might be some mixed opinions starting to build up a little bit, but generally people are supporting, their initial reaction is to support his tough clampdown on this, in inverted commas, one case that's come up.
Yeah, I know many West Australians said they knew it could happen eventually, but they were still surprised and pretty shocked by it. Hey, we also saw something that wasn't new to all of us, panic buying. What do you make of all those people who actually rushed to the shops right across WA?
Well, I wasn't one of them, I'll tell you that, Leah. We already had enough toilet paper. But
Good to hear.
One part of me doesn't blame them because I'm glad you're relieved to hear that. But one part of me could quite understand the panic buying because it was very short notice. All of a sudden, after weeks and months, if you're living in Perth, of not really having to worry terribly much about the virus. I mean, it's been most unusual, for example, here to see anyone wearing a mask, whereas now we have to. And all of a sudden, you're given a few hours notice that you're in lockdown for 5 days. So it's not, in a sense, even though McGowan did say, don't worry, the shops will be open, there's no need to do panic buying, it's not really a big surprise that people did panic. Apparently, it's much better today, I gather. The panic buying seems to have stopped. But I felt very sorry for the people in our local supermarkets, for example, who just all of a sudden got besieged with all these people wanting to fill their trolleys with toilet paper and other objects.
All right, and just quickly before you let you go, there are plenty of questions tonight about just how exactly this guard was allowed to work a second job at the time. Your take on that?
That's probably one of the most disappointing aspects of this outbreak, and the government has pretty much conceded your point because they are now announcing that they're taking measures to ensure that the security guards have only the one job. And so number one, they needed to increase the pay. So apparently they're looking at increasing the base pay for these people by 40%, thus avoiding the need for them to get a second job. They're doing it not because, they're doing it basically because it's a fairly low paid job and it's a temporary job. So you can't blame the people themselves for having two jobs, but it is a bit disappointing that given how much time we've had to see what's gone on in other states, that these measures weren't taken a while ago and might have avoided this particular case happening. Case 103, they're calling it now, by the way, Leo, here, because the police are investigating, or there are two investigations going on into the case. Number one, how did the security guard catch it in the hotel? And then number two, how come he was apparently, in contact with the community for a time after feeling ill?
All right, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us tonight, Jim. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you, Leonardo.
All right, well, overseas now, and world leaders are closely monitoring the unfolding situation in Myanmar after the country's military seized power earlier this week. Here's a recap of what we know so far. The country's now former leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, was detained in an early morning raid along with other senior officials from the government. Phone and internet connections in the capital were disrupted and state television went off air. The military government justified the coup by alleging widespread fraud in November's general election. Suu Kyi has now been charged for illegally importing walkie-talkies, which apparently violated the country's import-export laws. The reaction from China, however, has been met with some raised eyebrows after a government spokesperson said it hoped that all parties would properly handle their differences and maintain political and social stability, while a state-run news agency simply described the coup as a major cabinet reshuffle. That was despite the UN, EU and Australia all condemning the events.
Australia is deeply concerned by the events in Myanmar today. A good friend of Australia, an important member of our very close neighbours in ASEAN, and a country which has been on an important democratic transition for over a decade now. We are very concerned about the impact that this will have on that democratic transition.
And you've probably seen that clip of a Myanmar woman doing a live aerobics class as Parliament is seized by the military just a few times over the past few days, but why not again? Have a look at this, it really is amazing. And I think the best thing about that clip may actually be the music. I can't understand a single word, but it is catchy. Maybe even the official anthem of 2021. Well, changing pace now, and Canada has named the pro-Trump group the Proud Boys a terrorist entity on the grounds that it openly supports violence and played a pivotal role in the capital siege. To be listed as a terrorist entity in the country does require reasonable grounds to believe that the group knowingly participated in or facilitated terrorist activity or has knowingly acted in association with a group that has. The move means that anyone belonging to the group could be banned from the country, while the group's assets can also be frozen by banks and financial institutions, and that it could become a crime for Canadians to knowingly deal with its assets. It came after the US Justice Department arrested and charged Ethan Nordine, a top member of the Seattle branch of the Proud Boys, over his alleged role in the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. Back home now, and Collingwood players have written an emotional letter on behalf of its AFL, AFLW and netball teams as the fallout continues from the club's bombshell racism report earlier this week. The open letter was endorsed by 150 athletes at the club, beginning with one word: sorry. Through our silence, we feel responsible for these injustices, and it is simply not enough to just show support for the principles of anti-racism and inclusion. It goes on. It did come as a lot of people called for Eddie Maguire to resign as club president immediately after. He said that the report was a historic and proud day for the club. Maguire later apologised for those comments. Effigies of Greta Thunberg have been set alight in India after the teenage climate activist voiced support for the country's protesting farmers. Crowds gathered in Delhi to protest against several international celebrities, including Thunberg and pop singer Rihanna, who reportedly angered the government after tweeting about the ongoing protests this week. Since November, hundreds of thousands of farmers have camped out around Delhi, demanding several new agriculture laws are repealed. But in recent weeks, police have been cracking down on those protests by sending in riot police and parliamentary troops, cutting off entry and exit to the protest sites and blocking mobile internet access. Well, despite being warned by Prime Minister Scott Morrison, controversial Liberal MP Craig Kelly has returned to posting COVID-19 misinformation. Earlier this week, it was reported that Kelly had been given a dressing down for failing to support the government's vaccine strategy, but now he has shared content promoting a horse dewormer to treat COVID-19, which also included a link to an interview with University of Newcastle Professor Robert Clancy. But a statement from the uni actually said he was not speaking on behalf of them when offering his opinion on this issue. It came after Kelly clashed with Alison Langdon on the Today Show.
Every global medical body in the world has rejected the use of those two
that
drugs.
is incorrect.
Craig.
That is incorrect.
But you know what? I actually didn't want to get you on here to determine whether or not what you're saying is true or not.
But you are, I'm sorry, with greatest respect, you are making false statements that you are accusing me of, and I have a right to defend them.
You know what? Freedom of speech is one thing, Craig.
You said that everybody in the world, and that is simply untrue. The medical bodies in India use ivermectin. They have it in their standard protocol.
Craig.
I've seen a study recently published, a peer-reviewed study in the American Journal of Medicine, that has a treatment protocol that includes both hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. So to say that there's no medical body in the world that approves this, I'm sorry, is incorrect.
And there are also renewed calls for Kelly to be sacked or resign. You can let us know by voting in our Twitter poll right now. Just search 6NewsAU to find us. Overseas now, when Donald Trump says he won't testify at next week's impeachment trial, as a number of his loyal supporters continue to call it unconstitutional. House Democrats are now accusing Trump of inciting an insurrection when he urged supporters to fight the election defeat before they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. The former president's lawyers this week rejected the impeachment charge and asserted that Trump's claims his election defeat was the result of widespread fraud were protected by the US Constitution's First Amendment. The Senate trial starts on February 9, and of course we will have special coverage throughout next week right here on 6 News. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has been accused of homophobia over a tweet she made last August about Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. In the tweet, Psaki wrote, "Only in 2020 does Lady G get to post a bunch of debunked conspiracy theories while questioning Sally Yates." Quote, now, Lady G isn't a nickname for Lady Gaga, rather it's used to mock Graham over rumours about his sexuality. What are your thoughts? Is it homophobia? You can let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Well, it's time for your Eye on Entertainment now, when thousands of US conservatives say they're boycotting right-wing network Newsmax after anchor Bob Sellers walked off the set during an interview with MyPillow CEO and prominent Trump supporter Mike Lindell. Lindell was invited onto the program after he was suspended from Twitter on both his personal and corporate accounts, but things quickly went off the rails after he began to claim that Dominion's voting machines rigged the election in Joe Biden's favour. Sellers was then forced to read a legal statement in response to reports that Newsmax, OAN and Fox News would all be sued for comments made by on-air personalities and guests about alleged voter fraud. But media analysts have been keeping a close eye on the network, which has reportedly ramped up its conservative point of difference. For example, this is how Greg Kelly, the host of Newsmax's 7 p.m. show, opened his program just a few days ago.
Welcome to this pro-Trump conservative show. Yes, I like Donald Trump for his policies and for his style. There, I said it. I'm straight with you. When too many in our media and our government are not straight with their audience.
And meanwhile, the UK's broadcast regulator Ofcom has banned China's English language state-run news channel CGTN. In a statement, the regulator concluded that CGTN's licence holder, Star China Media Limited, did not have editorial responsibility for the channel's output, and as such they did not meet the requirement of having a licensed service and so is not a lawful broadcast licensee. CGTN later released a statement of its own saying they have an excellent reputation worldwide for professionalism. However, it's not yet clear how greatly the impact will be on the channel. The regulator also confirmed to Euronews it only applies for their ability to broadcast on satellite and not its online streaming service. While checking tomorrow's forecast right across the country, Brisbane light showers, the top of 23, Sydney 22, 23 degrees in the nation's capital, 18 degrees in Melbourne and Hobart, Adelaide sunny 24, rain in Perth 24 as well, and in Darwin heavy storms, a top of 29. Well, finally tonight, I know we've got a lot of viewers in the US and they are of course celebrating a massive day today. Of course, it is National Fettuccine Alfredo Day. Yes, really. According to nationaldaycalendar.com, fettuccine Alfredo enjoys a history as rich as its flavour. In 1908, Alfredo di Lelio's concern for his pregnant wife's lack of appetite caused him to put his talents to work, and since then the dish has been satisfying pasta lovers around the world ever since. The website also encourages you to celebrate with a big dish of fettuccine Alfredo, or simply go to your favourite Italian restaurant, which is a bit hard given the pandemic right now, but clearly a very important day in the US. Are you a fan of the dish? Do let us know in the comments section below. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with all the latest news by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Just search 6 News A to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.